The summer night hung in the air like a promise as I made my way toward the distant glow of the bonfire. Camp Evergreen had been my summer home for 3 years now, but this year felt different somehow. Maybe it was because I was finally a senior camper, or maybe it was the way the pine trees seemed to whisper secrets as I walked the familiar dirt path. Whatever it was, I could feel something special waiting for me at the edge of the forest where flames already reached toward the star-scattered sky. Let me take you back to that night, a night that would change everything for me. The camp had been buzzing all day with preparations for the annual midsummer bonfire. Counselors hauled logs, kitchen staff prepared Esmo-Ray's ingredients, and we campers spent the afternoon gathering kindling, our hands sticky with pine sap and our laughter echoing through the trees. There's something magical about anticipation, isn't there? The way it builds in your chest until you can barely contain it. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Jamie, and at 18, this was my final summer at Camp Evergreen before college. I'd always been the quiet one, more comfortable with a book by the lake than center stage at talent night. My friends called me thoughtful. My parents called me introspective. I mostly just felt like I was waiting for something, or someone, to help me understand myself better. That's the thing about being 18. You're caught between who you've been and who you might become, and sometimes it takes a single moment to bridge that gap. The bonfire was already roaring when I arrived, a massive pyramid of logs that sent sparks dancing into the night sky like fireflies. Around it, familiar faces glowed orange in the firelight, my cabin mates, counselors I'd known for years, and other campers from across the grounds. Someone was strumming a guitar, the melody weaving through conversations and laughter. I found my friends easily enough, claiming a spot on one of the logs arranged in a circle around the fire. "Jamie, we saved you a seat," called Mia, patting the space beside her. "We thought you might have gotten lost in your book again and forgotten all about tonight." I laughed as I sat down, accepting the gentle teasing. Not a chance. I've been looking forward to this all week. And I had been, though I couldn't have explained why this particular bonfire felt so important. Sometimes your heart knows things before your mind catches up. That's when I saw him across the fire. Let me explain why this moment matters. Because sometimes you can look at someone you've seen a dozen times before and suddenly see them completely differently. His name was Eli, and he'd been at camp as long as I had, though we'd never been in the same activity groups. He was part of the theater crowd, always performing in the camp plays or leading songs, while I stuck to archery and nature hikes. But tonight, as he laughed at something his friend said, the firelight catching in his dark curls and illuminating his profile, it was like seeing him for the first time. Our eyes met across the flames, and instead of looking away like I normally would, I held his gaze. He smiled, not the broad, performative smile I'd seen him use during camp announcements, but something smaller, more genuine, just for me. Then he raised his hand in a small wave, and I felt my face flush warmer than the fire could explain. The evening progressed as these camp traditions do, with stories and songs, and the inevitable ghost tales that made younger campers huddle closer together. Camp Director Morgan led us through the traditional camp songs, her voice carrying across the clearing as we all joined in. There's something about singing together around a fire that breaks down barriers, isn't there? The way voices blend and harmonize, creating something beautiful that no one person could make alone. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice Eli had moved until he was standing right beside our log, asking if anyone minded if he joined. My friends shifted to make room, and suddenly he was sitting next to me, our shoulders almost touching. Up close, I could see the freckles scattered across his nose and the way his eyes reflected the dancing flames. "Great night for a fire," he said, and I nodded, searching for something clever to say, but finding my usually reliable vocabulary had abandoned me. "Perfect night," I managed, and immediately wished I'd said something more interesting. But he smiled again, and somehow that smile made me feel like perfect night was exactly the right thing to say. As the evening wore on, the temperature began to drop. July nights in the mountains can be surprisingly cool, and I watched as Eli rubbed his arms, trying not to shiver. He was wearing just a t-shirt, while I had my trusty denim jacket, the one covered in patches from national parks I'd visited with my family. "Are you cold?" I asked, already shrugging out of my jacket before he could answer. "A little," he admitted. "I didn't think it would get this chilly." "Here," I said, holding out my jacket. "I'm actually pretty warm from the fire." This wasn't entirely true, but the thought of him wearing my jacket sent a strange thrill through me. He hesitated for just a moment. Are you sure? I don't want you to be cold. I'm sure, I said, and watched as he slipped it on. My jacket was slightly too big for me, which meant it fit him perfectly. Something about seeing him in my clothes made my heart beat faster. The patches, the worn cuffs, the pin marks on the inside pocket. All these pieces of me now surrounding him. Thanks, Jamie, he said, and the way he said my name made it sound different, somehow special. It smells nice. Like pine and... He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. Like you, I guess. Now it was my turn to feel embarrassed, but in the best possible way. We sat side by side as Counselor Dave started telling the legend of the Camp Evergreen ghost, a story we'd all heard a dozen times, but still pretended to be scared by. When the scary parts came, Eli leaned closer to me, our arms pressing together, and I wondered if he was actually scared or if he was finding an excuse to be closer. Either way, I didn't mind. The night progressed with more stories, more songs, and the inevitable s'mores making. Have you ever noticed how making s'mores creates instant bonding? There's something about the shared experience of trying to achieve the perfect golden marshmallow, the laughter when someone catches fire, the sticky fingers and chocolate-smeared smiles. Eli and I shared graham crackers and chocolate, our fingers brushing with each exchange, each touch sending electricity through me. You've got chocolate, he said at one point, gesturing to the corner of my mouth. Before I could wipe it away, he reached out, his thumb gently brushing my lip. Time seemed to stop for a moment, the sounds of the camp fading away until there was just his eyes looking into mine, his hand near my face. Then someone called his name, breaking the spell, and he pulled back with a soft smile. As the night grew later, campers began drifting back to their cabins, especially the younger ones who had earlier curfews. The circle around the fire grew smaller, more intimate. Someone suggested we play truth or dare, and though I usually avoided such games, tonight I found myself nodding along with everyone else. The questions and dares started innocently enough. Favorite movies, embarrassing stories, dares to sing camp songs in funny voices. When it came to Eli's turn, he chose truth. Is there someone at camp you have a crush on? Asked Mia, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Eli looked thoughtful for a moment, his fingers playing with the cuff of my jacket that he was still wearing. Yes, he said finally, his eyes finding mine briefly before looking away. But I'm not saying who. The group groaned and tried to persuade him, but he held firm, a small smile playing at his lips. When my turn came, I chose dare, afraid of what truths I might have to reveal if asked the same question. I dare you to put a note in your jacket pocket for whoever you have a crush on, said Tyler with a mischievous grin. Since Eli's wearing it now, he can be the messenger. My face burned as everyone laughed, not knowing how close to home the dare had hit. Eli looked at me with curiosity, perhaps wondering if I would refuse. Fine, I said, trying to sound casual as someone handed me a small notepad and pen from their backpack. I turned slightly away from the group, my heart pounding as I tried to decide what to write. In the end, simplicity won out. I folded the note tightly and reached over to Eli. Which pocket? He asked, and there was something in his voice, a tension and anticipation. Left inside pocket, I said, and watched as he tucked it away without looking at it. Our eyes met again, and I wondered if he could hear my heart pounding. The game continued, but I barely paid attention, too aware of my note sitting in my jacket pocket, now pressed against Eli's chest. What had I been thinking? The dare hadn't specified that the note had to reveal who my crush was. I could have written anything. A joke, nonsense, a simple hello. Instead, I'd written 3 words that felt both too much and not enough. It's you, Jay. As the fire burned down to embers and the night grew even later, campers continued to drift away until only a handful remained. Eli stood up, stretching, and I tried not to stare at the strip of skin that showed as my jacket rode up. I should probably head back, he said, then looked down at himself. Oh, and I should give you your jacket back. Keep it for tonight, I said impulsively. It's still cold, and you have a longer walk to your cabin than I do. What I didn't say was that I liked the idea of him wearing something of mine, of having a reason to see him again tomorrow. He looked surprised but pleased. You sure? I can bring it to breakfast tomorrow. I'm sure, I nodded, trying to sound casual while wondering if he'd find my note tonight or in the morning. or if he'd find it at all. He thanked me again, and we all began the walk back toward the cabins, the paths lit by flashlights and the nearly full moon overhead. At the fork where we had to go separate ways, Eli lingered for a moment. "Thanks again for the jacket," he said softly. "It was really nice of you." "Anytime," I replied, and meant it. We parted ways, and I lay awake for hours in my bunk, replaying every moment, every look, every touch. Had I imagined the connection between us? Would he find my note? And if he did, what would happen next? Morning came too soon and not soon enough. I dressed quickly, my stomach a knot of anticipation as I headed to the dining hall for breakfast. Would he be there? Would he have read my note? What would he say? The dining hall was buzzing with the usual morning energy, sleepy campers loading up on pancakes, counselors making announcements, the clatter of dishes and silverware. I scanned the room, trying not to be too obvious, and finally spotted Eli at his usual table with the theater kids. He wasn't wearing my jacket anymore. Of course not. It was already warm this morning, and I couldn't read anything from his expression from this distance. I got my food and sat with my friends, trying to focus on their conversation about the day's activities while stealing glances across the room. Halfway through breakfast, I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find Eli standing there, my folded jacket in his hands. "Morning," he said, and was it my imagination or did his voice sound different? Softer somehow. I wanted to return this. "Thanks again for letting me borrow it." "No problem," I said, taking it back, our fingers brushing in the exchange. I waited, heart pounding, for some sign that he'd found my note. But he just smiled and turned to go back to his table. My heart sank. Maybe he hadn't found it after all. I unfolded my jacket, intending to put it on despite the warm morning, when something fell from the pocket. Not my note, something else. A small folded paper shaped like a heart. I opened it with trembling fingers, aware of my friends watching curiously. Inside was a message in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. "It's you too. Meet me at the lake dock after lunch." My heart soared as I looked up, finding his eyes already on me from across the room. He raised his eyebrows in question, and I nodded, unable to stop the smile spreading across my face. He smiled back, a private smile just for me, before turning back to his friends. The morning passed in a blur of activities I couldn't focus on. All I could think about was meeting Eli at the dock after lunch. What would I say? What would he say? Had he really felt the same connection I had? Or was this just curiosity on his part? Lunch couldn't come fast enough, and when it finally did, I barely tasted my food. My friends noticed my distraction but attributed it to lack of sleep after the late bonfire. As soon as I could politely escape, I made my way down to the lake, my jacket tied around my waist despite the summer heat. The dock stretched out over the clear blue water, empty now during rest hour when most campers were back in their cabins writing letters home or napping. I sat at the edge, feet dangling above the water, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. "Hey," came Eli's voice from behind me, and I turned to see him walking down the dock, the sun highlighting the auburn tones in his dark curls. He was carrying something in his hand. "Hey," I replied, suddenly shy despite having known him for years. He sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched, just like at the bonfire. For a moment, we just sat in silence, looking out at the water. "So," he finally said, turning to face me, "your note was unexpected." I felt my face heat up. "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" "Definitely good," he said, and the smile that accompanied his words made my heart flip. "I've actually wanted to talk to you properly for ages, but you always seemed so contained, like you didn't need anyone else." This surprised me. Me? I always thought you were the confident one, always performing, always surrounded by friends. He laughed softly. "That's just what I want people to see. Inside, I'm mostly just nervous and hoping people like me." He paused, looking down at what he was holding, which I could now see was a small origami crane. "I made this for you. In theater, we learned origami for a Japanese-inspired play last summer." He handed me the delicate paper crane, and I took it carefully. "It's beautiful. Thank you. There's a legend that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you get to make a wish," he said. "This is just one, but maybe it still counts for something small." "What would you wish for?" I asked, looking up from the crane to find his eyes already on me. He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I'd wish that I could kiss you, if that's something you'd want too." The world seemed to narrow to just this moment. Just us on the dock with the sun warming our shoulders and the gentle lapping of water against the wooden posts beneath us. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he leaned forward slowly, giving me time to change my mind. His lips met mine gently, a question more than a demand. I answered by kissing him back, my hand finding his on the weathered wood of the dock. It was a simple kiss, sweet and brief, but it felt like the beginning of something important. When we pulled apart, his smile was as bright as the sunlight dancing on the water. "I've been wanting to do that since last summer," he admitted. "When you won the archery competition and looked so surprised at yourself." "That long?" I asked, amazed that he had even noticed me then. He nodded. "You have no idea how excited I was when you offered me your jacket last night. I spent the whole evening trying to work up the courage to talk to you. And I spent the whole evening trying not to stare at you." I confessed, which made him laugh. We talked for what felt like hours, but was probably only the duration of rest period. He told me about his dreams of studying theater in college, his struggles with his parents who wanted him to pursue something more practical, his favorite plays and movies. I told him about my love of nature and books, my plans to study environmental science, my collection of national park patches that decorated my jacket. "That's why I noticed you initially," he admitted. "Your jacket. It was like wearing your personality, all these places you'd been and things you loved. When I put it on last night, it felt like being wrapped up in you somehow." As the camp bell rang, signaling the end of rest period and the beginning of afternoon activities, we reluctantly stood up. Neither of us wanted this moment to end, but we both had responsibilities. He was helping with the junior drama class, and I was scheduled to assist with canoeing. "Can I see you tonight?" he asked as we walked back toward the main camp. "After dinner? We could take a walk around the lake." "I'd like that," I said, and the way his face lit up made me bold enough to reach for his hand, twining our fingers together for the brief moment before we had to part ways. The rest of the day passed in a happy daze. Even my cabin mates noticed the change in me, teasing me about my constant smiling. That evening after dinner, true to his word, Eli was waiting for me outside the dining hall, and we spent hours walking the lakeshore path, talking about everything and nothing, stopping occasionally to kiss under the trees or skip stones across the water's surface. That night became the first of many. For the remaining 2 weeks of camp, we found every possible moment to be together, during free time, after meals, sometimes sneaking out after lights out to meet at the lake and count stars together. We joined each other's activity groups when possible, so I found myself trying theater games while he attempted archery, with limited success but endless enthusiasm. And my jacket? It became something of a shared possession between us. He would wear it on cool evenings, and I would wear it during the day, each of us leaving little notes in the pockets for the other to find. Sometimes they were jokes or quotes from books and plays. Sometimes they were simple expressions of affection, and sometimes they were promises for the future, because we both knew that camp would eventually end, and we would have to return to our regular lives. The night before the final day of camp, we sat together at the closing bonfire, his arm around me as we watched the flames. The same scene where our story had begun, now transformed by everything that had happened between us. "What happens after tomorrow?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as our time together dwindled. We lived in different states, me in Colorado, him in California. College would take us even further apart. He tightened his arm around me. "We stay in touch. We text and call and video chat. We make plans for breaks and holidays. And we remember that what we found here isn't something that happens every day. Do you really think we can make it work?" I asked, wanting desperately to believe it was possible. He turned to face me fully, taking both my hands in his. "I think that when you find someone who makes you feel the way you make me feel, you do whatever it takes to keep them in your life. Distance is just geography. It can't change what we've built here." As the fire burned down and campers began heading back to cabins for one last night, we lingered, neither wanting to say goodnight. Finally, as the last embers glowed orange in the darkness, he took off my jacket, which he had been wearing, and placed it around my shoulders. "Check the pocket," he said softly. I reached into the left inside pocket and found a small envelope. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a tiny paper crane pendant, similar to the origami one he had made me that day on the dock, but this one preserved in clear resin. "So you don't forget," he said as he helped me put it on, his fingers warm against the back of my neck. and to remind you that I'm working on those 1,000 cranes. I've got a lot of wishes I want to make with you. The next morning was a chaos of packing and tearful goodbyes with friends and counselors. Eli and I had arranged to meet one last time before our separate buses departed. We stood slightly apart from the crowd, my jacket now packed away in my duffel bag. "This isn't goodbye," he said firmly, his hands holding mine tightly. "It's just see you later." "See you later," I echoed, trying to memorize everything about him in this moment. The way the morning light caught in his hair, the exact shade of his eyes, the feeling of his hands holding mine. He kissed me one last time, soft and sweet and full of promise, before we had to join our separate departure groups. As my bus pulled away from Camp Evergreen, I watched him through the window, his hand raised in farewell, until he was just a small figure in the distance, and then gone from sight altogether. But not gone from my life. True to his word, we stayed connected. Daily texts became nightly phone calls, became weekend video chats. We sent each other care packages, his full of playbills and theater memorabilia, mine containing pressed flowers and stones from hikes. And always, there were notes, digital now instead of paper, but no less meaningful. When winter break finally came, he flew to Colorado to meet my family. I showed him my favorite hiking trails, introduced him to my friends, and watched with delight as he charmed my parents completely. In spring, I visited him in California, where he showed me the ocean and took me to see plays in small local theaters. And the following summer, we both returned to Camp Evergreen, not as campers this time, but as junior counselors. On our first night back, we snuck away to the empty bonfire pit where it had all begun. "Do you remember that first night?" he asked as we stood in the circle of cold ashes. "When you lent me your jacket?" "How could I forget?" I replied, touching the crane pendant I still wore around my neck. "It was the night everything changed." He smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small paper heart, similar to the one he had left in my jacket pocket that first morning. "Some things don't change, though," he said, handing it to me. I opened it to find 3 simple words written inside. "Still you. Always." And as we stood there under the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of our story, I knew that some connections, like the one forged over a borrowed jacket and a note left in a pocket, were meant to last far beyond a summer bonfire. Sometimes the smallest gestures, like lending someone your jacket on a cool night, can lead to the greatest adventures of your heart. Total _char_count, 18,726.